Welcome to our first edition of Community Corner. I'm Kim Baker, CEO at the Gallatin Area Chamber of Commerce, and we are so glad that you are here with us today. Today we're going to be kicking off this series, which is a partnership between the Gallatin Area Chamber of Commerce and Vol State Community College, filmed right here in Gallatin, Tennessee. We're thrilled to have you with us, and over the next several weeks and in the days ahead, we're going to be bringing in special guests to help you find your way at the corner of commerce and community, which is at the core of the Chamber's mission and so much of what happens right here at Vol State Community College. Today, I have a very special guest joining us today. He's special to me in so many ways. He is my husband, but he also is the executive director of the Sumner County Museum. His name is Ryan Baker, and we're thrilled to have him with us. So Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
How does it feel to be the first guest on the Community Corner?
Hey, I'm just super excited. I think it's going to be a good time.
Awesome. Well, so the foundation of this show really came out of the idea of wanting to make those in our community more aware of what really fuels commerce and community in the Gallatin area, what keeps things going, what makes Gallatin great, and really help folks become more aware of the needs and opportunities within our area. So I always believe that the foundation is where we've been. And who better to tell that story than the director of our local museum? I think it's important that everybody understands our history. So why don't you kick us off and tell everybody a little bit about the history of Gallatin, Tennessee?
Sure. So, Gallatin was founded in 1802, and just shortly before that, Sumner County got its start in 1786. I think it's pretty interesting that Sumner County was actually a county before Tennessee became a state 10 years later. We were actually part of North Carolina at that time.
So, there's been a lot of different things happen through time, and I know that we could sit here to talk all day about everything, and that would probably really excite some people who like history, and it would probably be a complete snooze fest for many others. So tell us a little bit about the museum and how you help tell that story of Sumner County's rich history, and then how do you keep it engaging, and how can people find out more when they're off the show from us?
Sure. So, the Sumner County Museum, actually it started in 1981. It was the vision of a local businessman and philanthropist, John Garrett. John owned Garrett Brothers Concrete, so you've probably seen the trucks roll through town, still a family-owned and operated business today. But John had a passion for history and preservation, and he was a collector of all things history, loved to keep those stories alive for future generations. And at some point, he decided to start the Sumner County Museum, and it's been open. We've got about 10,000 square feet of exhibit space, thousands and thousands of artifacts, each which tell their own story in history of Sumner County. But that was put together through volunteer efforts and was mostly volunteer ran and operated up until recently. So we have exhibits that go all the way back to BC times. We've got stories about the Native Americans that used to live here, then with the long hunters coming in and the explorers in this area, all the way up to modern day. So we even have Gallatin's first pump fire engine at the museum, which is one of the kids' favorites. But we have began to really try to tell more of the stories. Like, if you go to the museum, you're going to see a lot of stuff, a lot of artifacts, and a lot of times you have to have someone take you through the museum to actually connect with some of those stories. So what we have done is try to improve on that so that people can really make that connection with the past. Because like you said, when you opened, you can't really know where you're going unless you know where you've been. So that history is really important for us to be able to preserve and continue to tell those stories to people today.
Tell me a little bit about, I know that because I've been in the museum a few times, I have a few exhibits that are my personal favorites. One of them is Gallatin's first stoplight. Mm-hmm. That's in there. And then talk about maybe your top three that are super neat, maybe rare, and really unique to Gallatin.
Sure. So my favorite probably, and right now we just have a very small display. We plan to make it more interpretive in the future. But early on, when I had started with the museum, on a rainy day, I was just looking through some of the stuff. We have a big storage room just full of interesting things. We still don't know exactly what all is in there because the museum has collected a lot over the years. But one day I found a box and it just said buffalo balloon. And I thought, well, I wonder what that is. So I got it out and I started discovering these artifacts and some newspaper articles and some other publications that talked about the world's first airmail delivery.
Wow.
And so that was actually in 1877, and it was via hot air balloon. So this man had built this balloon called the Buffalo balloon. He was originally from Buffalo, New York. And one thing I couldn't figure out is why bring it to Tennessee, but nevertheless they did. The article actually describes the balloon of how massive it was. It had purple and gold embroidery. But anyways, they had a group that flew from Nashville to Gallatin, and along the way they had pieces of mail, and they would tie these long streamers to them, and I guess they probably announced it to the public that this was happening. So there's accounts of this crowd that kind of followed it as it flew over, and they would drop the mail out. And once you found it and picked it up, there was instructions of what to do with it next, which told you to take it to the local post office so then it could be delivered. So what I didn't know, even living here my whole life, was that Gallatin's home to the world's first airmail delivery.
That's pretty awesome, and it's a really neat thing to see.
It is.
I think one of the other things that I really like about the museum is finding those different landmarks that used to be here and have transitioned in the museum over time. I know there's one, I moved here 23 years ago, and there's actually something that is iconic to Gallatin that was in its home when I relocated to Tennessee, but now it's in its final resting place of the Sumner County Museum, and that is the marquee of the Sumner County Drive-In.
Right.
Talk about that for a minute, and talk about that exhibit, I guess, and how that's interactive and set up today.
So we've got an old 1941 Chevy hard body sedan, and at that time, if you've been to, some of the drive-ins today, you just tune your radio into a certain station and the music will play through your speakers in the car, the sound. But then they actually had posts set up at every spot where you could park a car, and you would set these big clunky metal speakers and hook it onto your window so that sound played into the vehicle while you're watching the movie. But I know that I frequented the Sumner County Drive-In, so it was actually in operation up until the late 90s. And I remember seeing like Jurassic Park and some other shows there that was really special. And you look back, you can look at some of the old menus that we have that were, a cheeseburger was $0.25 or 50 cents. And
it's a lot cheaper than today.
Really cool, yeah.
So obviously there's a lot of artifacts that live in the museum, but I think that it's safe to say that the Sumner County Museum and what you're doing now is so much more than a museum. Talk a little bit about your present day projects and what you're doing to advance the museum and really stabilize your mission, but then perpetuate the success into the future.
Sure. So the museum actually owns 4 different properties in Gallatin, and we have over the past few years been working on a vision for those properties, how they can be sustaining yet still serve the community. And we have a 10-year plan that includes what we call Historic Stonewall, the Carriage House, and then the shop. Now the first 2 were built in the 1830s, the shop in the 1920s, and then of course the current museum facility that we have. So in doing that, we have, if you look at historic homes or historic house museums across the nation, we're all facing the same challenges. Mm-hmm. Funding is really difficult. Keeping people engaged and interested in those entities or homes presents its challenge. So what we have done is we are coming up with what we feel is going to be a sustainable model that will still fall within our mission, but yet sustain the museum and its activities for years to come. And in doing that, we have actually opened, we've finished phase 1, which was Historic Stonewall, and it is now open as a historic Airbnb stay. It sleeps 8. We have the 3 bedrooms upstairs are all historic beds. Mm-hmm. We've got new amenities, new mattresses, new comforters, things like that, but we still have the historic bedding on top. And then downstairs, there's a master suite. It's a little more modern. So you can kind of really just immerse yourself in history, even if it's just for a night, stay there. And all the rooms have a QR code you can scan, and it takes you to a landing page where it talks about the pieces of furniture and some of the other items that you find in those rooms.
And some of that furniture dates back to the early 1800s, correct?
It does.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then some of the other pieces are antique reproductions that Mr. Garrett actually made. So I know I mentioned one of the founders, John Garrett. This was his home. Okay. And when he passed away in 2017, he left it to the museum to be preserved. And the home has been lived in for close to 200 years. So we figured the best way to keep preserving it is to let people live in it and enjoy it, and to bring in a revenue source, for the museum.
We're almost out of time, but I want to touch on something that I think is really cool and will really be a unique attraction and really living history, and that's the distillery project. Talk a little bit about that.
So the old workshop, built in the 20s, we're working on a model that will include a distillery and a brewery in the same building. It'll have to be separated per Tennessee law, but the idea is to make it a Prohibition era type facility. It'll have a speakeasy upstairs that could be used for like a small event space for local gatherings, things like that. But we're looking to do like a classic lager, like a Prohibition lager, and then of course like a Tennessee whiskey and some other things. And we'll really be telling the story of Sumner County during Prohibition. So there were a lot of moonshines and whiskey steals up in the hollers, out in Bethpage and Cottontown and places like that. And so we have a lot of those stories that we can tell, so that we're still, within our mission, but we're also bringing in another source of revenue to help sustain us.
Awesome. So if somebody wanted to learn more about all of these projects or even everything that's housed in the museum, where would they go to find you?
So first place to start would probably be our website, sumnercountymuseum.org, or our Facebook page.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming out today. I appreciate the efforts you put into preserving our rich history. It's so important. And I think the mission of the museum is what?
Well, it's to make the history of Sumner County meaningful and attractive to a broad audience, and that's what we're trying to do.
And I think you certainly do that. So thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, if you're tuning in today, be sure to check out the Sumner County Museum. I think you're going to love what you find there. Make the time to go. If you're tuning in and you do not live in the Gallatin area, you heard it here first that you have a great place to stay when you do visit or choose to spend some time in our area. We are going to be filming this show every week. We're going to be partnering with Fall State Community College to bring you Community Corner and tell you all the ins and outs of Gallatin, Tennessee. Between now and then, we hope you'll follow us on social media. You can do that at Gallatin Chamber. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, also YouTube. Be sure to check out with Fall State's going back. The students return next week, and when they do, the college is going to come back to life and fully vibrant. They've got a lot of cool projects going on here. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time on the Community Corner.